Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor spends most of his birthday in police custody. He's now been released under investigation and his properties in Berkshire and Norfolk searched as part of a criminal inquiry.
Good afternoon.
What's your reaction to your brother's arrest, sir? Sir, what's your reaction to your brother's arrest?
The government had advance warning, but not the palace. The King insisting the law must take its course.
The first step here has been taken by the UK, which is amazing. I think there's so much more that needs to be done here.
That is the brother of Virginia Giuffre welcoming the arrest. Here we've had an ambassador sacked and now a former prince questioned. So why haven't things been moving as quickly in the United States? We'll discuss that tonight. Plus, we hear from the family of a British couple sentenced to 10 years in prison in Iran as Donald Trump mulls a possible attack on the country. $17 billion and 20,000 troops pledged as the Board of Peace meets for the first time in Washington. But is this all part of a plan to Bigfoot the United Nations? That is all coming up on The World with me, Dominic Waghorn. Good evening. If a prince can be held accountable, so can a president. The words of one American lawmaker at the end of an extraordinary day. The arrest of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has sent shockwaves around the world and across the Atlantic, and it arguably makes the Epstein controversy even more uncomfortable for President Donald Trump. Here in the UK, the sovereignty of the law has been underlined with an ambassador fired and now a prince arrested. In America, so far, there's been no accountability for the alleged crimes of a paedophile and his high-level alleged accomplices.
The Department of Justice and Pam Bondi, our Attorney General, have done anything but hold people accountable. They've not released files. They've redacted files that I've tried to unredact. And so we are still in a tough place right now in the United States with the lack of accountability.
That's one of the congressmen demanding that Andrew now gives evidence in America. His calls are backed by the lawyer for 11 Epstein survivors who told me America has been put to shame by events in Britain.
There were a lot of names in the Epstein files of prominent Americans who had close ties with Jeffrey Epstein, and they are not being investigated. So I would like to say that no one is above the law here, but apparently that is not the case.
More from both of them later. We'll ask how much longer the Trump administration can risk looking like it is willfully obstructing progress. Plus, could this latest explosive development push the president to change the subject with an attack against Iran? Lots to get into tonight. But first, this is how Donald Trump responded to news of the arrest.
Well, you know, I'm the expert in a way because I've been totally exonerated. That's very nice. I can actually speak about it very nicely. I think it's a shame. I think it's very sad. I think it's so bad for the royal family. And to see what's going on with his brother, who's obviously coming to our country very soon, and he's a fantastic man, the king. So I think it's a very sad thing.
Well, that is the far from exonerated President Trump. But at the end of an extraordinary day, our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, has this report.
Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor photographed in the back of a car leaving a police station in Norfolk, as Thames Valley Police confirmed that a man arrested in his 60s had been released under investigation. The unmarked police cars were seen on the Sandringham estate with no advance warning for the King or the wider palace that his brother was going to be arrested. Thames Valley Police then releasing their statement confirming they were questioning a man in his 60s and searching properties in Norfolk and Berkshire. Not naming him, but it was clear it was Andrew on the day he marks his 66th birthday. The first senior royal in modern history to be arrested, questioned on suspicion of misconduct in public office. It comes after police had been looking at emails from the latest Epstein files and allegations that Andrew, during his time as trade envoy, may have passed on confidential details to the convicted paedophile and other business contacts. Andrew has always denied any wrongdoing.
Really, what it boils down to is the question of whether the police have evidence that Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor willfully misconducted himself as a trade envoy to such a degree as to amount to an abuse of the public's trust in him. Now, that's a matter of judgment. It's a matter of evidence. It depends on what evidence the police may have.
Particularly painful for the royal family because it goes right to the heart of their public service. A statement from the King came quickly, saying, "I have learned with deepest concern the news about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and suspicion of misconduct in public office. What now follows is the full, fair and proper process. They have our full and wholehearted support and cooperation. Let me state clearly, the law must take its course. Meanwhile, my family and I will continue in our duty and service to you all."
Are you concerned about Andrew's arrest, Your Majesty?
Hours later, we saw that with both the Queen and King out on separate engagements, where the questions may come.
What's your reaction to your brother's arrest, sir?
But it's through carrying on with their duties that they continue to try to distance themselves from Andrew. This is an institution that really isn't that reactive. They won't be forced into saying things. But in this case, they knew that there was no alternative. They had to respond. Because whatever happens around Andrew's arrest, whatever the outcome may be, it does still raise serious questions about trust and also the wider public role of the monarchy. The King and the Palace now hoping the statement shows they are not ignoring the enormity of it all and open to scrutiny in a way that we have never seen before. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News at Buckingham Palace.
Well, among the 3.5 million emails, documents, photos and videos released last month were several which prompted serious questions about the former Duke of York's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has been going through the files.
It was the latest release of the Epstein files, 3.5 million of them, that piled the pressure onto Andrew. Now he has been arrested. And they contain embarrassing documents, photos like this of him on all fours at an undisclosed location. But the police investigation doesn't appear to be about his interactions with Virginia Giuffre or any potential allegations of sexual abuse, allegations Andrew has always strongly denied. Instead, it's his time as a trade envoy, an official position that is under scrutiny. The timeline here is really important, so let's start with that. It was back in September 2001 that Andrew was appointed trade envoy. In June 2008, his friend Jeffrey Epstein was convicted in Florida for procuring child prostitution. Just over a year later, Epstein was released from prison. In December 2010, Andrew visited Jeffrey Epstein in New York. In 2019, he said that this is when he broke off contact with him. In February 2011, Andrew continues to email Epstein, and we'll come back to this. In July 2011, Andrew was forced to quit his trade envoy role. April 2015, and allegations against Andrew emerge in court documents regarding Virginia Giuffre. And in February this year, police started assessing claims over his links with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the latest files appear to show correspondence between Epstein and Andrew when the latter was trade envoy on non-personal business. So let's start with this email. It's from November 2010, and what it is an aide forwarding to the Duke of York attached reports for Vietnam, Singapore, Hong Kong and Shenzhen in relation to your recent visit to Southeast Asia. That was as trade envoy. 5 minutes later, the Duke, as he was known back then, forwards that on to Jeffrey Epstein. There's another one too. This is about Afghanistan. It's also 2010. It's sent in December, and it's from Andrew directly to Jeffrey Epstein himself. And he says, attached is a confidential brief produced by the Provincial Reconstruction Team in Helmand Province. That's in Afghanistan. He sends that directly to Epstein and says, I'm going to offer this elsewhere in my network, including Abu Dhabi, but would be very interested in your comments. Then there's this email from Andrew again to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the important thing here is the date, February the 9th, 2011. That is after when Andrew had originally said he ended his relationship with Epstein, but it's also when he's still a trade envoy, that official position. The contents of these emails are just fragments of events, and we don't know the specifics of the allegations being investigated. Again, this all appears to have taken place while Andrew was trade envoy, an official position. He has denied all wrongdoing, and it is now the subject of a police investigation.
Tom Cheshire there. Well, we'll cross to our US correspondent James Matthews in a minute, but first to Shaman Freeman-Powell, who is at Sandringham. Shaman, Andrew's been released, but his ordeal is really only just beginning, I think it's fair to say. So much activity where you've been today.
Yeah, that's right. There's still lots of activity here at Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate. I'm currently surrounded by press. The world's media has descended here on Wood Farm. There are still a few police officers too milling around, but we have heard earlier from a statement released by Thames Valley Police that it does seem that the searches at this property have now ceased. And as we also heard earlier on, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has been released under investigation. But as you say, this is now still in its very early stages of that investigation. It could be the case that Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor is asked again to come in and answer questions. Now, one of the points of the police carrying out this arrest earlier this morning, it's around 8 a.m. this morning, is to give police access to search these properties, the property here at the Sandringham estate, as well as at Royal Lodge as well. And the police will be looking for any information, any documents that could help them with this investigation. So we're talking about any paperwork or diaries that could be at those addresses, as well as any digital communications. So earlier, when Andrew Mountbatten was under arrest and in custody, it is likely that the police were making their way through these addresses to try and find any information that could support their investigation. Police will also likely be liaising quite closely with the Crown Prosecution Service. It's, of course, the CPS that will later decide if charges are brought. But as it stands, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has been released under investigation, and it was only a few hours ago that he made his way back here to the Sandringham estate.
Over to James in Washington now. James, are Americans ashamed at all, do you think, that the UK does seem to be forcing the pace on how to deal with the Epstein controversy, for now at least?
Yeah, hi, Dominic. I think you hear that on the news, you read it in the papers, but I'm not sure that is a mood that's necessarily shared amongst the public. I think there'll be the biggest story of the Epstein affair this week in the States will be the appearance of Bill and Hillary Clinton, I think, at the end of the week. And that is entirely in keeping with the way the Trump administration has played the Epstein files. It's worth remembering they were released in the first instance on Christmas Eve, and there's been this drip effect, and the people front and centre have been Bill Clinton, pictures of him in the swimming pool and so on. So you ask your average American about the Epstein files, and Clinton will be one of the names at the forefront in their mind. I think the way the Trump administration have handled the release of the files has induced an Epstein fatigue in a country, remember, where the truth matters almost less than political patronage. And I think in the United States, the longer that we go with nobody taking a fall, the more the expectation is that nobody should take a fall from all of this. So there is, yes, an accountability gap. I might say in the private sector, there are people who have fallen on their sword, but nobody in the Trump administration has, despite the likes of Howard Lutnick clearly having told mistruths in the public arena, and yet he remains in his job. So that has to be a concern. It very much is amongst Democrat members, certainly of the House Oversight Committee. I spoke to Subramaniam today out in Virginia, and he says this is good, this arrest, because it indicates progress, and he applauds the action of Thames Valley Police. But he also makes the point that the Epstein affair is about much more than alleged misconduct in public office. It's about child sex trafficking, the wider international network. Let's have a listen to what he said today. Incidentally, Dominic, he said he would go anywhere to speak to the former Prince Andrew, even if that meant travelling to the United Kingdom.
I think this is a breakthrough. The reality is no one's been arrested in a position of power like he has and been held accountable the way he's being held accountable now. But we're getting somewhere here. And I think it shows that this investigation is fruitful and yielding some results. And the victims certainly are appreciative of the fact that law enforcement is willing to hold people accountable based on what's found in the files. That this isn't just an exercise in voyeurism and seeing who is involved and engaged with Jeffrey Epstein, that there's going to be real consequences.
What do you think are the implications for your request for Andrew to come and give answers or take questions from the House Oversight Committee?
Well, he says he did nothing wrong and he committed no criminal activity or wrongdoing, which is fine. But if he wants to clear his name and his family's name, then he'll still come and cooperate with us. And so we still have questions about his involvement with Epstein and Maxwell. So I want to still hear from him. The door is still open. We will do it on his terms and engage on his terms. I just want to make sure he tells the truth to us because he has not been truthful so far.
What questions do you have for him?
I want to know what he knew about Jeffrey Epstein's crimes, about his sex trafficking. I want to know if he thinks that the victims are lying and that he did nothing wrong. I want to know what he did as it relates to financially being involved with Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and whether they were blackmailing him, for instance. I have a lot of questions for him, and he can answer them, and he can take them one by one, and he can do it in the UK, and I will fly out to the UK if that's what he wants me to do. But we just need to hear from him, and he needs to clear his name, and the one way to do that is to talk to us.
Yeah, tell me about that, the logistics of how this could work. You say you'd be prepared to fly to the UK. How could it work?
Yeah, he can testify remotely. He can testify in person in the UK. We are going to New York to meet with the Clintons, for instance.
As a committee, you want to hear from Andrew. Do you want to hear from other members of the royal family?
Not right now. I think Andrew's the one that keeps coming up in these documents.
Yeah, you speak about a degree of accountability here. Where do you see that going or growing indeed?
I hope that the U.S. follows what the UK is doing and starts making arrests and starts holding people accountable. I'm concerned about our law enforcement right now. The Department of Justice and Pam Bondi, our Attorney General, have done anything but hold people accountable. They've not released files. They've redacted files that I've tried to unredact. And so we are still in a tough place right now in the United States with the lack of accountability.
So, James, it sounds like from what you're saying that you think the administration is kind of choreographing this whole controversy very much currently in its favour.
Yeah, I absolutely do think that, Dom, and I think we see further evidence of it. Today, Donald Trump was asked about his reaction to the arrest of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. His answer was, it's a very sad thing. Spoke about the King coming to the States later this year. Sad thing, that phrase, I take that to mean a family tragedy for the royal tragedy, but he very quickly followed that up with, I am totally exonerated. So shoehorning his claim of innocence into the conversation without addressing, of course, the thousands of mentions that he has in the files, along with close associates. He denies any involvement in anything improper, of course, but there is a real whiff of scandal around this and a real concern in the United States that there is an accountability gap in terms of casualties elsewhere, but very few over here.
James Matthews in Washington, Shaman Freeman-Powell, thank you very much, both of you. And moving on now, of course, the highest penalty for misconduct in public office is life in prison. Andrew has not been charged with any crime and he has repeatedly denied all accusations against him. One such accusation was from Virginia Giuffre, who said she was repeatedly sexually abused by the then prince. Today, her brother and sister-in-law responded to news of Andrew's arrest.
It feels like this surreal moment, a piece of justice that like Virginia has been fighting for this entire time. And I think we're just so proud. We're so proud. We're so freaking proud of our sister right now. We really wish she was here physically to see it because it is her pressure and her truth that has brought us to this place that has, paved the way for all of these survivors to come forward. And so, there's mixed emotions. We just miss her so much and wish that we could call her to just scream on the phone with her,
The first step here has been taken by the UK, which is amazing. I think there's so much more that needs to be done here. I'm hoping they conduct a full investigation and there's a conviction of some sort. I think, the thing that keeps resonating in my head is when my sister, she famously said, and I'm just going to paraphrase this now, but like, they know what happened, we know what happened, and only one of us is telling the truth, and we know that's us. If they're capable of doing this most heinous crime out there, what else are they capable of doing? And so that's what we're seeing downstream here. And I hope that this is just the beginning, because I think there's a lot to be said. I think if you follow the money, you follow their position, you're going to start uncovering some really hard, dark truths very quickly.
Well, lawyer Lisa Bloom represents 11 survivors of Jeffrey Epstein. She told me she would also like to see Andrew investigated over sexual assault allegations.
On behalf of the 11 Jeffrey Epstein survivors who I represent, we say thank you to the UK for arresting Prince Andrew, formerly Prince Andrew, and for showing that no one is above the law. This is really a very positive development for us.
I mean, it's a massive move and piece of news over here, but how's it going down in America generally?
I think it's also very big news over here, because all we can do is compare ourselves to the UK. There were a lot of names in the Epstein files of prominent Americans who had close ties with Jeffrey Epstein, and they are not being investigated. So I would like to say that no one is above the law here, but apparently that is not the case.
What are your clients saying to you in the wake of this extraordinary news today?
Well, I'll tell you something. Arresting Andrew for potential trade secret disclosures matters, but you know what matters even more? Women's lives. We would also like to see him investigated for the sexual assault allegations against Virginia Giuffre and potentially others. We saw a photo in the recent Epstein file release of him virtually on top of what looks like an underage girl. He can't really tell entirely, but that's the way it looks. We would like to see that investigated.
I mean, is there a sense from what you know from the survivors that this is, although a massive day today in what has been an extraordinary controversy so far, I mean, how far into this are we, do you think, and how much bigger is it going to get on both sides of the Atlantic?
Well, we've only got about half of the documents, 3.5 million pages. We understand there's about 3 million more. So we would like it all to be released, and we would like the names of high-profile people or anyone who's not a survivor that have been redacted to be unredacted. Why are we covering up the names of people who are talking about 9- and 10-year-old girls, for example? So we still have a long way to go.
As you say, there's a glaring contrast, isn't there, between what's been happening in America and what's been happening on this side of the Atlantic. Here we've seen an ambassador fired or had to resign. We've seen now a prince or a former prince called in for questioning and arrested, and nothing like that on your side of the Atlantic. You know, America is meant to have taken the principles of justice from the old world, from Britain, and improved upon them. And that doesn't seem to be happening here, does it? What is going on, do you think?
Well, it's very obvious what's going on. We have a president who said openly he did not want these files released. We have a president whose name is thousands and thousands of times in these files, in these documents. A president who has himself been found liable for sexual abuse of a woman and accused by 26 others, 4 of whom I represent. So he even told a congresswoman he didn't want the files released because he didn't want to embarrass some of his high-profile friends. So we have a president who uses the Justice Department like his own personal law firm instead of for the benefit of all of us. That is clearly what the problem is. The problem starts at the top.
And yet there doesn't really seem to be, from where I'm sitting here at least, the sort of sense of outrage and public sort of demand for more progress on this that you might expect. Do you think what's happened with Prince Andrew is going to add to any more pressure on the administration to do more to release the files and to, to usher in more accountability over this?
Well, first, I would beg to differ. I think there is considerable outrage, especially among women and especially among survivors. I mean, my social media is filled with women who are just outraged about the Epstein case, that they're not done. They want to see justice. They want to see Americans and people all over the world held accountable if they had any role. And what we want is simply further investigation. I'm not saying that just because somebody's name is in the Epstein files, they are guilty. Of course not. But there is a lot of suspicion and a lot more investigation is warranted. And I think women, especially in the U.S., are deeply concerned about this, and we're not going to shut up about it.
Now, you have been calling for Andrew and all the others involved in this, allegedly, to come forward and say what they know and what they've seen and what they can contribute to the investigation. Are you worried at all that now that Andrew is under arrest and is going to have to seek legal advice, he's going to be more, I guess, hamstrung about what he can say, what he can reveal about his involvement with Jeffrey Epstein?
First of all, he can say whatever he wants to say. His lawyers might tell him not to, but he is the ultimate decider. And I say to Andrew that there is nothing more important than your integrity and your legacy. If you have done something wrong, it is time to come clean. And I'll tell you something, Americans, when we are faced with somebody who does that, who asks for forgiveness, who is honest, we tend to be a very forgiving people and we give second chances. But until that happens, if Andrew continues to clam up and not talk, which is I'm sure what he's going to continue to do, we are going to continue to speak out about him.
How much embarrassment do you think there is amongst Americans about this contrast between the way the British government and British state has moved pretty swiftly on the Epstein controversy, and yet that's not really happening in America?
It's deeply disturbing. I agree with you. Listen, I've been an attorney for survivors for 40 years. I believe in our justice system. I believe in accountability. For the most part, our justice system has worked. But in this case, clearly it did not. And we see not just in the UK, but Australia, all over the world, France, people being held accountable. And it is just not happening here. And it is deeply embarrassing.
And do you think, finally, the levee is going to break? Do you think that that sort of groundswell of outrage that you say particularly women feel is going to eventually force the administration to do a lot more on this?
You know, it very well could. I take my hat off to some right-wing folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert. These are Republican congresswomen who broke with their party, who insisted that the Epstein files get released. And I call upon them, whatever side of the aisle they're on, to continue to push for accountability. That's the only way it's going to happen.
Lawyer Lisa Bloom, well, we've heard a lot of comparisons so far between how the files are being treated here and what's happening in the US. In Britain, Lord Peter Mandelson was sacked as US ambassador last September over his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. And last week, his properties were searched by police in North London and Wiltshire. In the US, former President Bill Clinton and his wife Hillary have only just agreed to testify to the House committee next week. They both deny any wrongdoing. We're now seeing criminal investigations in Britain, but nothing like it yet in America. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has been stripped of his royal titles and today arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Compare that with the American billionaire Les Wexner, labelled as a co-conspirator to Epstein in an unredacted FBI document, but facing no criminal charges. Giving evidence to Congress yesterday, he insisted he was conned by the late paedophile and denies any wrongdoing. Well, let's get more on this for the White House columnist at The Hill, Niall Stanish. Niall, let's talk first of all about the claims from the president we heard there, who's clearly trying to brazen this out, saying that the great thing is he's been totally exonerated by the Epstein files. Let's just clear that up first of all. He hasn't, has he?
Oh, he hasn't. I mean, there is no proven wrongdoing yet. But that is not the same as being exonerated. As several of your other guests have mentioned, his names are all over the Epstein files. There are also genuine issues. For example, to just name one, he has always said that he had no specific knowledge of Epstein's crimes. Now, the latest releases included a FBI interview with a former Palm Beach, Florida chief of police who said that Trump had called him in around about 2006, thanking him for investigating Epstein and saying words to the effect of everybody knew or everyone knows that he's been doing this. There are also lurid, though uncorroborated, allegations against Trump in some of these files. So, yes, he denies any wrongdoing and always has, but that's not the same as a total exoneration.
But we have been hearing from James Matthews, our correspondent in DC, saying that Donald Trump's team have been choreographing the way that the files are being released and the names in them, and saying that actually the box office event is not actually Prince Andrew's arrest. It's going to be Hillary and Bill Clinton's testimony at the end of the week. Do you agree with that? Is it still sort of keeping the heat off Donald Trump and his team?
I'm not sure I wholly agree with that. It is certainly the case that when the Clintons testify, it'll be a massive news story. And I think this does get to the fact that increasingly here in the US, anything is seen through two different lenses depending upon the political affiliations of those involved. Now, to be fair, there has been pressure from the right, as your last guest mentioned, to release the Epstein files. It was based on the idea that there's this sort of Epstein class of people who have been dodging accountability and dodging justice. But I do think that the arrest of the former Prince Andrew, I mean, it's certainly a major news story here, and a Democratic Congresswoman, for example, Melanie Stansbury, was on social media tweeting that if a prince can be held accountable, so too can a president. So that's a democratic view of the matter.
And we're hearing from Lisa Bloom there saying that there is a lot of outrage out there, particularly amongst women, but it doesn't seem to be breaking through yet in terms of making the administration do more. And the key question really is when it's going to release the rest of the files, millions more files, and if those files are going to be redacted as much as the files they've released have been so far.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the public appetite for disclosure of the Epstein files has not been satisfied. It has not been satisfied partly because of the scale of those redactions and partly because of there being approximately 3 million files still in the vaults. In addition, Dominic, if I could just briefly add, I mean, there is a very clear contrast between senior figures in American politics like the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who wrongly claimed he had cut off contact with Epstein at a certain point, to the consequences we see for not just Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, but Peter Mandelson, for example, in Britain, as well as figures in Scandinavian politics and elsewhere in the world.
But the villains of the piece so far are Brits, I guess, aren't they? And does that give those in the MAGA movement who thought Donald Trump was going to lift the lid on this alleged sort of cabal of paedophiles and believe that the Epstein files were at the heart of that, and they initially were pretty angry, it seems, by the kind of evasion of doing that, but they seem to sort of cool down in their anger. Is that fair to say? And is that because they are being distracted by events over on this side of the pond?
I think it's largely because the political or partisan dynamics of the Epstein matter have flipped. When Trump was out of power, he was going to come into power, he was going to drain the swamp and expose it all. Now it is primarily, though not exclusively, Democrats who are pushing for increased exposure of all of this stuff. I do think, though, I mean, we have to be careful because both Mr. Mountbatten-Windsor and Mr. Mandelson deny any wrongdoing, but they are being investigated, at least, for passing along sensitive information, allegedly, to Epstein. Do we really think that only happened in the case of Brits? Nobody at the high level of American politics was doing that? I mean, just on its face, that seems to stretch credulity, it seems to me.
Niall Stanley, thank you very much. As you say, both Lord Mandelson and Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor are insisting they are innocent about all the charges levelled at them, but this is a story that is going to go on and on. Thank you, Niall, in Washington. Let's turn to Iran now. The son of a British woman jailed for 10 years for espionage alongside her husband has told Sky News that she is in a panic after hearing the news. The Foreign Secretary has condemned Lindsay and Craig Foreman's sentence as completely appalling and totally unjustifiable. Our Home Editor Jason Farrell has this report.
It was supposed to be a 4-day trip into the country. Now Lindsay and Craig Foreman face 10 years in an Iranian prison. Lindsay's son speaks to her daily.
I spoke to her yesterday, I spoke to Craig yesterday, and there was mass panic. You know, it's kind of like, how has this come out? They the whole time thought their innocence would prevail. Hearing that your parents have been sentenced to 10 years in Iran, especially the notorious Evin prison, is horrible.
What conditions are they in?
It's dire. I mean, I can't paint a picture that would serve it justice. It's horrendous. It's unsanitary, it's overcrowded. Their bunk beds are metal framed, there's no mattresses.
The couple were motorcycling around the world, but were arrested last January and charged with espionage. The sentence comes after a 3-hour trial in October in which they were not allowed to present a defence. The Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, said this sentence is completely appalling and totally unjustifiable. We will pursue this case relentlessly with the Iranian government until we see Craig and Lindsay Foreman safely return to the UK and reunited with their family. But Anousheh Ashouri, who was released after 4.5 years in an Iranian jail, says the government isn't doing enough.
They should work full throttle so that they could get them out of that cesspool. Even as I am speaking, I'm becoming very emotional because I know where they are and I know what the hell that place is. Please get them out. And the other British citizens who are there now.
Mr. Ashuri was released alongside Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, whose husband Richard campaigned for years for her release.
Richard Ratcliffe has been through a similar situation with his wife. Have you spoken to him? Has he given you advice?
Listen, he doesn't have the answers. No one does. That's the problem. But what he does say is that the route that we are taking and keeping it visible, keeping them in the light, keeping their names prominent, is a route that he would take again.
Yeah, because I know he was encouraged not to. And have you been encouraged not to?
Yes, yeah. We were both given the exact same advice, actually.
Say nothing.
Say nothing. You know, quiet diplomacy. If you say something, it will harm their chances. It might put them in danger. Where actually the reality is on the contrary. It's the complete opposite.
But it won't be easy bargaining with such a volatile state.
Along these railings outside the Iranian embassy are the faces of people who have been allegedly killed protesting against the Iranian government. This is not a country that has a measured or fair judicial system, and the British government warns its own nationals that if they go to Iran, they are at significant risk of detention.
The Foremans are imprisoned metres away from each other and will only be briefly reunited in the coming days to receive their sentence in court. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, with me now is Anusha Ashuri, who was held in Iran's Evin prison for several years and who was also sentenced for 10 years for spying back in 2017 before he was released in 2022. Anusha, thank you very much for coming in to talk to us today. I mean, when you heard the news about Lindsay and Craig really getting the same sentence as you were given back in 2017, what went through your mind?
Well, in fact, I am going through the same. It's like as if I am watching my own story again with all the pain that I was experiencing. And I'm really emotional even now that I'm talking to you. So I have to be trying to be in control of my emotions.
Well, we appreciate you coming to talk about it because it's important, is it, to give us a sense, I think, of what Lindsay and Craig are going through and how they can get through this ordeal and their family as well. Have you been in touch with the family, and what's your advice to them at the moment?
Yeah, I've been in touch.
Bombshell sentence, 10 years.
I've been in touch with Joe, and we went to 10 Downing Street and we handed the petition. But I am so disappointed by the way the British government has acted so far, I mean, all through these years. In fact, because I become emotional, I have to write down the notes that I want to say. So I'll read it very quickly so that... So in 2022, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee launched an inquiry into state hostage diplomacy and took evidence from detainees and their families. In April 2023, it published Stolen Years, concluding the UK was failing its citizens and calling for structural reform. MPs rejected quiet diplomacy, warned that the silence encourages hostage-taking even further, and called for zero tolerance and stronger language. The committee recommended a senior director with direct access to the Prime Minister and a stronger protection for British nationals. Unfortunately, in July 2023, the government responded but rejected all key reforms, and the structure did not change. And therefore, we are here with Lindsay and Craig's situation, and not only them. In addition to Lindsay and Craig, I personally know of at least 3 other British nationals who are in Evin prison right now, but they cannot dare make themselves public because of the fear that they are.
So, and that's a pretty comprehensive list of complaints about the government. Well, what's the biggest mistake the government's still making? What's the biggest problem, do you think, with what they're not doing?
They are not firm in protecting British nationals.
Firm enough with the Iranian government?
No, I mean we have got Jimmy Lai, for example, in China, which we were really hoping that when Keir Starmer went to China, we would see some change. But unfortunately, he received his sentence, and now he is is going to be there in China for a long time. And this is really disappointing.
And you should give us a sense of what Lindsay and Craig are going through in Evin prison.
Well, if I want to compare it with my case, which is quite similar, during the period of my interrogation phase, which was about 116 days, in 2 interrogation centers, in the first one, in the interrogation center 209, I reached my point of threshold, and I ended up with 3 suicide attempts. Luckily, I survived, but
3 attempts.
It is that intense. That's why, and every day I am following the progress of going in front of Judge Salavati, the judge of death, and receiving that 10-year sentence. I mean, this, like what Solzhenitsyn used to say, the tenor. So everybody receives almost everybody receives a 10-year sentence, regardless of whether they are innocent or guilty.
And how do you get through those 5 years? How your advice to Joe, their son, is to pass on to his parents what? How do they get through this?
Remain hopeful, but be as loud as you can, so that the British public can hear you, so that they can support you. And if we have got silence, unfortunately, the British government is not going to do anything like what they are not doing, in fact, with the other 3 that I know, British nationals who are in Evin prison right now.
And Nazanin, I know, and Richard told me that what helped her get through was the other Iranian inmates with her, giving her strength and support. Was that the same with you?
Yes. In fact, when you are transferred from the interrogation center into the main prison compound, then you see so many fine people, highly intelligent, highly educated, who can be supportive of you, but that's not enough.
And you've gone through, as you say, you've gone from 3 suicide attempts to release, and now you've run 4 marathons. That's how you put yourself back together.
Yes, but I'm still going through my flashbacks, nightmares during the nights, and also anxiety attacks. And unfortunately, we have received no help from the British government. In fact, the only organizations, the charities that helped us manage so far were Hostage International and Amnesty International.
And it can't be easy to come and talk about this with us, but we're grateful that you have. Thank you very much for highlighting their plight and passing on some advice as to how they might get through it.
You're more than welcome.
Thank you for coming in. Thank you very much. Well, we've been talking about the prospects of US military action all week against Iran, and today Donald Trump said the world will find out within 10 days whether the US will reach a deal with Iran or take military action. Have a listen to what he had to say.
So now we may have to take it a step further, or we may not. Maybe we're going to make a deal. You're going to be finding out over the next probably 10 days. Or if that doesn't happen, I maybe can understand. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But bad things will happen.
Well, he made those comments after the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk urged his nation's citizens to immediately leave Iran after a rapid US military build-up in the region. Part of Washington's contingency plans for a direct attack on the country are said to involve RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire. But Sky News understands the UK has not yet agreed to allow the US to launch airstrikes from there or from a British base on Diego Garcia. Well, let's bring in Elliot Cohen, who is a former advisor to the Secretary of State and is now at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. Mr. Cohen, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I think others have said there's a sort of 80 to 90% chance of military action in the coming days. What would you put the figure at?
Well, I'm not sure I'd put a number, but I think it is more probable than not. And that's simply because the negotiating positions of the two sides are so far apart. The Iranians are not going to give up their ability to enrich uranium. I don't think they're going to give up their support of proxies in the region. I don't think they're going to give up their ballistic missile programs. And basically, the Americans have been putting demands on all 3, particularly on the nuclear side. And it's just very hard to see what the negotiation space is. There may be something, and the Iranians are wily negotiators, but at the moment, it doesn't look that way.
We heard yesterday from Brett Bruen, a former Obama-era diplomat, who said this could be part of a kind of strategy of coercive diplomacy where Donald Trump bombs Iran and then says, right, come back to the table, and if they don't, bombs them some more. Do you see this as part of that strategy, or is it going to be a sort of a one-and-done kind of military action, which is something I guess we're more familiar seeing from Donald Trump?
Yeah, well, with Donald Trump, you never can tell, can you? Not all of his military actions have been one and done. You have to think about the campaign about the Houthis, against the Houthis early on. I think that went on for about 51 days. And of course, a lot depends on what the Iranians do. I mean, if, let's say, you have a massive punch that the United States delivers, do the Iranians respond by doing things in the Straits of Hormuz to interrupt the flow of oil? In that case, things continue. You know, war is always a two-sided affair, so we're not the only ones who have a vote in this. I would suspect that, you know, I think Trump would prefer a negotiated deal. I think he understands that a protracted conflict is problematic in a number of ways, but he won't be entirely in control of the situation.
Yeah, as you say, I mean, he would prefer a deal, but he's put a lot in place, hasn't he, to kind of force the Iranians to make one. If they choose to be stubborn and to resist, as they can sort of do, it's a kind of virtue, isn't it, resisting for the Iranians and the Shia faith. If they don't comply, he's kind of then forced to attack Iran. But what if that doesn't really achieve much in terms of, you know, threatening the regime? It could almost strengthen it, couldn't it? And it could force the people to rally around their despised government.
You know, there's a quaint belief that being bombed strengthens your resolve. That turns out to be very rarely the case. And it's certainly not the case for this regime, which is so wildly unpopular, which has just massacred thousands, possibly even tens of thousands of its own citizens. You know, it is in a very precarious situation. Its air defenses have not really been rebuilt since the 12-day war and Operation Midnight Hammer. It has to know that its people would love to tear it limb from limb. So it's not that they're in a good place. The problem, I think, is that the Iranian regime has built its identity from the very beginning to implacable hostility to the United States, to Israel, and around the idea of a nuclear program. And they will find it very hard to give up on any of those things.
Sure, but also their other strength. Sorry, Mr. Go, just to you know, press the point. They also, their other strength, of course, they have hundreds of thousands of Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps guardsmen and Basijis who are armed. They have the guns, and the protesters don't. You know, without putting boots on the ground in Iran, there's a limit to what American firepower can achieve there, isn't there?
Oh, I think that's right. I think, and that's part of the limits of what the United States might run into. On the other hand, the RGC is a large organization. There's some parts of it which are very tough fighting units, others which are essentially business enterprises. It's extremely corrupt. The Basij are a militia, so they come from the people, including the people some of the people who've been massacred. And so you can't tell. Now, I suspect that the administration is trying to follow as closely as it can internal developments in Iran. I suspect, furthermore, that what they're hoping is if they do have to use force, that you'll have some fairly intense use of force, and then you'll try to cut a deal with some different element of the regime, which would not be a bunch of liberal Democrats. It wouldn't be the son of the Shah, but which would be more inclined to make a deal to allow Iran back onto the international stage, to allow it to export oil freely, and to allow it to begin addressing what are really very, very urgent domestic problems. At least I think that I suspect is the American calculus. Whether it turns out to be a correct calculus, that's a very different matter.
We'll see. Elliot Cohen, thank you so much for your time. Good to have you on The World tonight. This is The World with me, Dominic Waghorn. Next up, President Trump convenes the first meeting of the Board of Peace and welcomes billion-dollar pledges to help rebuild Gaza.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster that's just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town.
It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change.
We've been crushed. Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first.
Well, hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome. Westminster, the heart of British politics.
I'm so sorry about what happened to you.
So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think? It's really unusual. Mornings with Richard and Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist.
A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan has the right to respond.
You're like, what?
Historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
Welcome back. Well, we've heard a lot of talk about Donald Trump's Board of Peace. We've seen some of the plans for rebuilding Gaza. Today, the board met for the first time in Washington, and it was all about money. Donald Trump confirmed that the United States would contribute $10 billion. He gave no details about where the money would come from, but said it will go towards bringing harmony to a region tortured by centuries of war. 9 other members agreed to donate $7 billion towards a Gaza relief package. And football governing body FIFA has promised to help raise $75 million through projects in Gaza.
Our plan is for the ISF to be assigned in 5 different sectors, each sector receiving 1 ISF brigade. In the short term, we plan to deploy to the Rafah sector first, in addition to the training of police. Midterm objective is to continue to expand, sector by sector, all moving to our long-term 12,000 police and 20,000 ISF soldiers. I'm incredibly pleased to announce today that the first 5 countries have committed troops to serve in the ISF: Indonesia, Morocco, Kazakhstan, Kosovo, and Albania.
And that was the head of the International Stabilization Force for Gaza there. Let's go live now to Washington on our US correspondent, David Blevins. David, what this board is saying is it will work hand in hand with the UN, but, you know, there's a lot of scepticism, isn't there? A lot of people think it's simply an American and Israeli plan to substitute or replace the UN completely.
Yes, many believe it is set up to undermine the UN. President Trump said today that his Board of Peace would overlook the United Nations and make sure it was operating properly. To describe it as a different kind of diplomacy, Dom, would be an understatement. The most eclectic mix of people, well, men, really. I only saw 1 woman. And the world's strong men at that, the sort of authoritarian figure Donald Trump is drawn towards, like Hungary's Viktor Orban. Some seemed more enthusiastic than others to be there. We noticed that when they took their seats, they'd been given the gift of a red USA hat. The representative from Kuwait placed his under the table, but a man seated just a few feet away was wearing his and grinning from ear to ear. That's the FIFA president, Gianni Infantino. Donald Trump said everyone else was a world leader, but it didn't matter because Gianni, in his words, is the head of soccer. So that strange partnership between the White House and FIFA continues. Nearly everybody got to speak. The whole thing lasted more than 3 hours. I suppose Donald Trump had better get used to that, though. He has appointed himself the chairman of the board for life.
Yeah, and he looked like he was falling asleep during some of it, didn't he, David? But moving on to Iran, we heard from Trump earlier saying that a movement could be expected within 10 days, depending what the Iranians do. But we're reminded, of course, back last summer, I think he gave the Iranians 2 weeks, and then 2 days after doing that, sent in B-2 bombers. Is there an expectation in Washington that we could see military action sooner than 10 days?
Well, yes, I think it is the supreme irony that the inaugural meeting of the Board of Peace was taking place amid all of this talk of war. The deployment of the largest group of US military aircraft to the Middle East since the invasion of Iraq back in 2003. That is what is fueling this intense speculation that a US strike on Iran could be imminent. Some are suggesting it could come as early as this weekend. Of course, Donald Trump says there's still time for Tehran to reach a deal, and some think perhaps he has deployed on this scale to put pressure on them. If that's the case, it's a very costly game of chicken, so costly that some think it will now be impossible for him to row back, despite the fact that in this midterm election year, even those in his own base are showing in the polls that they do not want him to get involved in any more foreign wars.
Can America tolerate another Middle Eastern war, do you think, very briefly?
Well, I think people are weary of foreign wars. His own base have said they want him to put America first. He's speaking right now in Georgia, back on the campaign trail, attempting to persuade them that he is now focused on domestic affairs more than he is on foreign affairs. But what's going on in Iran, I suppose, casts a shadow over that.
David Blevins in Washington, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us tonight, everyone. Yalda will be back on Monday. The wrap is up next. That's it, though, from me tonight. Thank you for joining us.